Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
It was just like this unrealistic expectation that I was going to be like the Barbie doll figure that they portray in the videos, but then also like we couldn't have our own intimate relationship without like watching videos at the same time. And that was more like what he wanted and for his pleasure. And I didn't really take part in it. So I would kind of just like sit there and let him do what he wanted while watching it. And it was more like he was getting pleasure from that rather than me, because I wasn't going to be doing what the girls in those videos were doing.
Hello and welcome to Seven on Sundays, the podcast about how young adults are navigating sex, relationships, and life today.
We are your hosts, Dr. Chez, Leeby, and Stephanie Boye. And each week we will share our candid conversations with young adults and experts about today's tough topics.
I know in our listening audience, there are those of you out there that have had a boyfriend or girlfriend that has tried something on you in the bedroom or had a sexual expectation of you that wasn't something you wanted or liked. I know this because I have this conversation over and over again with young people. So maybe you were okay with it for some time. Maybe like our guest today, Nicole, it never really felt okay. Today, Nicole shares with us the story of her first relationship, which began in junior high school. They were so young. They were each other's first partner, and the first person they ever had sex with, had a relationship with. Her boyfriend, she explains, had been watching porn before they got together, claimed he didn't watch it anymore, but he was pretty much addicted or had significant porn usage. I would say he habituated it. He emotionally manipulated her into engaging in kind of porn-informed sex or literally watching porn as they had sex, and she was like the body. I call this disembodied sex. For him, his brain was with the porn star, but his body was with Nicole. Nicole, meanwhile, is like all in her head figuring out how to perform like the porn actress on screen, and she can't even appreciate or be in her body. So this is obviously not healthy. They're not honoring or listening to their partner's body, doing what their partner thinks feels good to them. Instead, their partner's body is legitimately a means to an end. Today's episode is about porn, how it impacts, how it can influence what happens between a couple. In Nicole's case, it led to coercion and assault, really, in this relationship. And for her personally, it ended up putting her in a state of depression, giving her low self-worth, and even giving her an eating disorder. If Nicole's story resonates with you, maybe you see the red flags in her relationship and in her boyfriend's porn use, especially if it hurt you or impacted you the way it has Nicole.
This is a cautionary tale, and I think it's kind of a warning for parents and people in relationships that if you have these kind of things show up, they can deeply affect your self-esteem, your mental health, your future relationships, all those things. Her boyfriend, his brain's reward center and his pleasure centers in the brain were wired to porn. And that was because of starting so young and being so conditioned that he couldn't seem to escape that. And so then she's left with how to handle this, saying no, 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 or succumbing at times, and how that eats away at herself. Her kind of unhealthy outcomes and self sabotaging behaviors through an eating disorder. We're going to explore all that. It's good to hear that she's on her healing journey, and we support that and really appreciate her candor in this topic. So let's jump in with Nicole.
So I had been dating someone for, I want to say at that point it was more 3 or 4 years. Someone I met when I was like very young, 14, and I'm now older. And I never really thought that it was a problem that when he would write like cards or letters, that it would say a porn star's name as like the person writing the letter. And he thought it was kind of like a joke. But it more just kind of made me feel like that was my unrealistic expectation to live up to. And I always thought I was kind of alone and that I kind of had to take it as a joke. but it kind of hurt more than a joke, and so I felt like it was kind of important to share this story so other people my age recognize that it is a bigger problem because it's not something I've ever heard talk about.
I just want to clarify for 1 second. Did he use a porn star name for you or for himself?
It was more of like a threat, and so it was a female star, and he thought it was a joke to kind of hang her over my head as, like, what I should look like and what I should be doing and everything, and so he would sign it as that girl to continue to get in my head about her.
Okay. And you dated him for 3 or 4 years. So what point in the relationship did this start? Like, how old was he? I guess I'm trying to figure out.
I wanna say, like, 17, and
Okay.
we just broke up when I was 20, he was 19.
Okay.
So this was recent, only like 5 or 6 months ago.
I can't imagine, obviously, that it was limited to this. We say in our class, or we explain it like when people watch porn and that becomes such a part of their relationship, that there's like this performative aspect of their sexual relationship. Did you feel that? You sort of alluded to it when you said he wanted me to look like that and to act like that.
Yeah, it was just like this unrealistic expectation that I was gonna be like the Barbie doll figure that they portray in the videos, but then also, like, we couldn't have our own intimate relationship without, like, watching videos at the same time, and that was more like what he wanted and for his pleasure, and I didn't really take part in it, so I would kinda just, like, sit there and let him do what he wanted while watching it, and it was more like he was getting pleasure from that rather than me, because I wasn't gonna be doing what the girls in those videos were doing.
You're like 100% right. That's what happens. It's like, it's not about you. You are more or less, and I hate to say it, like the means to the end, but like really his head is emotionally involved with what's going on the screen. Maybe the first time you're like, oh, this is fun or interesting or different. But over time, you start to realize that you're just the body. You're just the vehicle. You know what I mean? You're not what he's engaged with.
That definitely towards the end, definitely was the case because it was more like he would hold the phone and watch that and then would want me to be doing things to him, or I was just kind of there as motivation, I would say. And I didn't necessarily put the pieces together while we were in it, like in the relationship, but after the fact, it makes more sense now. And eventually it just started collapsing, and I was weary to like his touch and didn't want to be around him anymore because I didn't really know like who he had become.
Did his behavior, his sexual expectations escalate throughout the relationship?
He definitely started wanting to try like newer things in our relationship and like things that I would have never ever thought of or ever been comfortable doing. But it was more again like the expectations from the video. And it just didn't feel right for me to be in that relationship like that because it's just not who I was, not something that we ever were together either. And so it was definitely not the correct thing for me to do to stay in that.
Did it start this way, or did this happen once you were already in the relationship? Was it immediately about porn? Like was there like that always a part of the relationship from the beginning?
No, it was like 3 or 4 years into the relationship. We started dating when we were like 14, and then it wasn't until like freshman year of college, I want to say, so like 17, 18. And then once that got added in is when things started getting off.
Do you think that he was watching porn even when you started dating, when you were like 13, 14? Because it's not unusual that people will be exposed to pornography like 9, 10, 11.
Yeah, I'm sure he was, and there had been times when, like, he would admit it, and then he would say, "But since we started dating, I don't because I don't need it anymore." And for a while, I believed that, but then there's a part of me that thinks, it was always, like, an integral part of his life, and there's nothing I could have done about that because they gave him something that I couldn't.
How did knowing that he was watching porn make you feel? Not even necessarily the times you were he was watching it while you were with him, but when you knew he was watching it and you weren't there?
It definitely made me feel like not enough, made me question my self-worth because it's almost like he's watching the stars on the screen, and that's what the expectation was, and it just made me question how much I actually meant to him or what I was worth to him because he knew I was never gonna look like that or be like that or behave like that or be able to offer him the same services. As weird as that sounds, it's just not something that was in the cards, and I was not very, like, sexually driven. That's just not really who I am as a person, and so knowing that he still had to do that on the side just kind of, like I said, made me question if I was enough for him and definitely, like, translated into more parts of the relationship.
I'm so sorry you had to go through that.
I have a couple questions, Nicole. Well, first of all, I wanted to know, how did the relationship end? Did you end it or did he end it?
So he ended it because, like, again, I didn't see really a problem while I was in the relationship, but it was probably also clouded. He said that he needed to focus on himself and his mental health, and I kind of took that as, like, a serious thing because as someone who struggled with mental health personally, I didn't think that he would kind of use that as an excuse because it definitely is a problem that people deal with, me included. And that just doesn't seem to be the case because he's gone on to now be dating one of my best friends from high school behind my back. And so it definitely just took a turn for the worse after we ended things. But for a good month or two after we broke up, he still texted me every day, still almost wanted a relationship without a title. And so that kind of just made me think he was kind of going into his like rebellious phase and just kind of wanted no attachment so he could just kind of like sleep around. So that's how it ended. That was back in December.
Okay, so it hasn't been that long. And before that relationship, was that kind of your first dating relationship at 14?
Yeah, that was my first and only.
So that's what's really interesting, and I'm just curious about how this is for your mental health, because you're a young 14-year-old, and did you say he was a year younger, so he was like 13?
He was 6 months. We're the same grade, same age and everything, but my date of birth is in September, his is in March, so it's, like, exactly 6 months apart.
So you guys are, 13, 14, or 14, 14 and a half, and you're starting this relationship, and then it, becomes an intimate relationship. You're dating for 4 years, and this is the only experience that you've had with these things, right? If you didn't share this with anyone, you only have your own gut to go on of saying, this doesn't feel right. This does feel like I'm not enough, that it has to be this other, person introduced and even by name. And, so he obviously had like a favorite or a person that he wanted you to have this expectation to be like. So I'm just curious where that leaves you today in terms of relationships. Like, there was an internal dissonance, your gut knew it, but have you kind of researched or asked friends or kind of understood, hey, this was really not okay. It's almost like there's a third person in the relationship, you know? So I'm just curious how that leaves you today. Like, where are you with relationships now?
I definitely I don't wanna say against them, but definitely, like, weary to get back into one because it definitely wasn't normal, and that's kind of, like you said, the only thing I know about, and among asking other friends and everything, that's not an issue in their relationships, and so it definitely is hard to, like, cope with that, and this feeling of not feeling good enough and not feeling worthy definitely will linger on for a while, and not even just in the sense of, like, sexual relationships, but just for myself. I mean, over the past year or 2, I've developed, like, eating disorder tendencies, and I'm in treatment for that, and just, like, deep depressions and everything just because of the way it was made to make me feel like I was not good enough, and so my self-esteem and self-confidence and everything else is just, like, plummeting because of this relationship, and I've lost the past 7 or 8 months to grief over the relationship just because of the feelings that I was made to feel.
Because you guys, I mean, kind of grew up together. Those are really important years, 14 to 18. So
Yeah.
you grew up together, and I'm sure there were some good time, it sounds like there were some good times if you were, still kind of he was texting every day. So there's a connection, an emotional connection and other connections other than this, but there is grief with that. That's a really long time. So I understand it. Steph can speak to this, but I will say you're not alone in the numbers of people that porn gets introduced into relationships, of course, because these things are all over. And eventually, certain people need that more in order to have satisfaction. So that does happen. So I know you're not alone in that, but you were really young. So I am really sorry because that's, I'm sure, really hard to deal with. I'll let Steph speak to that. And then I want to speak about the other mental health stuff too.
Sure.
As a baseline, just curious, what do you know about like how porn can addict people? Do you know anything about about how it works on people? Because I can give you a little bit of an explanation that might help you to understand.
I don't really know anything about it, and I actually didn't even know that it was possible to be addicted until
So,
I went to high school and one of my teachers openly talked about how he recovered from it.
uh-huh.
But besides that one person, I have no knowledge of it.
I just want to say that there is a lot of people who say, well, you can't get addicted to it. I'm not a doctor. I can't speak to, what constitutes an addiction. But I do know this, and I say this to my students all the time. I say, if something is disrupting your life, if something is taking you out of your relationships, if something comes between your relationship, if you can't get out of bed, and get to class on time because you're busy watching porn, masturbating to it, if it's disrupting your life, I don't care whether it's in any, diagnostic manual for, your mental health or not, it's clearly creating a problem in your life. So, and if you can't stop, that's a problem. So I really don't think it matters. I think what matters is the quality of your life when something is part of it. So if that was ruining it, and clearly it was, then it's a real problem. I don't care if you call it an addiction or a habit or I don't know, whatever else you want to call it, but it's obviously creating problems in your life. And I think that's really what's more important because you have to learn how to deal with the things that are causing problems in your life. So what happens to the brain is we get excited when something new and novel happens. It doesn't matter whether you're a kid and your parents give you a piece of chocolate cake for your birthday. It's like that is a reward. And our brain gets a little hit of dopamine every time we get some kind of reward. So if you win a race, if you're running and you win a race, you get a hit of dopamine. And that oftentimes drives people to do the behaviors that give them that reward, if that makes sense. So young for anyone, the highest hit of dopamine that you can get, the highest reward that you can get is through having an orgasm. That's the highest natural hit of dopamine. You can also have greater experiences through doing drugs, but clearly that's a chemical. But the highest reward that you get is from orgasm. And also, we're human beings. We're meant to, like in our most animalistic part of our body, we're meant to maintain the species, right? So like sex is a really strong drive in most people. So not in all people, and it's certainly different, but certainly like in the male species, it's a super powerful drive. Women have a lot of other stuff going on. That doesn't mean it's not equally powerful in them. So when we experience orgasm through sex, it's like we are just driven to do that. And pornography is creating that stimulation without the connection. And every time you get a little bored, it's almost like if you were to, eat a chocolate cookie every single time you got a reward, someone would come along with a peanut butter cookie. You'd be like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. That's just the way we are as human beings. Like variety, changing it up creates a little bit higher spike in dopamine. So in pornography, say you start out watching just normal missionary sex, that gives you a hit of dopamine, 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 dopamine. And then after the 10th time of watching it, your dopamine spike is here instead of here. And so you'd say, all right, now I'm going to watch 2 girls and 1 guy. So now your dopamine spike goes up again. And that's for another couple times. But then the dopamine drops down. And it becomes normalized, that amount. So you have to give it another hit. And that's why people with pornography tend to escalate. It's like drugs, you can't, and anything, honestly. I mean, how many people drink 5 cups of coffee a day? They certainly didn't start by drinking 5 cups of coffee a day. They probably started with 1 cup of coffee. Maybe they didn't even finish it, so that's like just the normal way. So what's happening to your boyfriend, your ex-boyfriend, is that he is escalating into these things. But then when he's with you, he needs that same type of stimulation in order to get aroused. He got used to it. His brain got wired to that type of stimulation. So if that stimulation was, I'm just going to say choking, because we happen to have been talking about that in another interview. But if he went from like watching just 2 people having sex to watching someone get choked, all of a sudden he's going to need that stimulation from you, if that makes sense. Does that sound kind of like your experience?
Yes, definitely, because it then got to a point that he wanted to incorporate like toys and also different like I don't know if popular is the right word, but popular like kink kind of things. Definitely things that I was not necessarily comfortable with, but the more he brought it up, and I think he kept bringing it up to try to like make me more comfortable with it, but he would keep bringing up topics like that until I just kind of like gave in and said like, okay, we'll try it. Definitely because that's what he had been seeing. And again, it was like that expectation that I lived up to what he was watching.
What I found is this is just observational, but women in my generation, a lot of times, if their spouse or their partner watched pornography, they would feel less than. The same thing that you said. But today, what concerns me is instead of feeling less than, a lot of partners in this generation feel like, how can I be that porn star? So it more drives them to do that performative sex or copying what the other person had. And it doesn't come from an organic place in our bodies. And that's how we become, honestly, I mean, I'm going to let Dr. Chez talk about this, but I feel like that's a way that we become disembodied because we're not doing what organically feels good to us sexually. We're doing what somebody else wants us to do or tells us to do. That doesn't come from a place where we can, like, you might even reach orgasm that way, but it doesn't come from a place that feels good. And every part of your sex life, good, healthy sex means that everybody in the end, there's no negative consequences. So if you're walking away from your sexual experiences and you feel gross because you did something that didn't align with your values, then that's not serving your higher good. It's not keeping you in your body. You know what I mean? You're doing something for somebody else. I'm going to let Dr. Chez speak to that.
Did you have anything you wanted to say about that, Nicole? Like, did you
Yeah,
walk away feeling kinda that icky feeling that Steph talks about, kinda feeling like, "Yuck."
yes, definitely. When we were away, because we didn't go to the same college, so like when we were at school too, it would translate more into like text messages and stuff. And like he would like type out what he was picturing in his head for us. And a lot of times those texts would have me doing things in them that would never happen in real life. But again, it created that expectation that that's what he wanted. And so when we did have the opportunity to be in person, it definitely was kind of just like not forced because there was no like restraints or like threats or something against me that if I didn't do it, but it was more like if you loved me, you'd do this kind of thing. So I ended up just kind of giving in, and I would just kind of like lay in bed at night and think like, who was that? Like that's not me. That's not something that I would ever even picture or even know was like a thing to be done. And so it just kind of did leave like that ick feeling.
And sometimes when we're in those experiences that we don't know how to get out of, There are those ways that we can disembody or kind of dissociate from our bodies to just get through it and be like, okay, but then we always come back to ourselves. So we're always back with, at the end, kind of processing and figuring out, well, how am I with this? And why is this the relationship I'm in? And why is he asking me these things, or expecting me to do these things? So it definitely creates all kinds of dissonance and difficulty. So I understand that. If you had said no, like, were there times that you did say no? Like, were you able to say, "No, I'm not into that"?
There's definitely conversations, and I can't remember specifics right now, but I remember there was one conversation where he wanted me to do something, and I kinda just said, like, "I don't understand how that would be pleasurable," and that kind of is very uncomfortable to me. Not something I could ever picture myself ever doing, even if it was, like, the love of my life, I could not do that, and that happened a few different times, and it was more like I would express my concern of being uncomfortable and not picturing that for myself, and he would just kinda, like, try to sway me or persuade me into thinking that it was normal to the point where I would just give in. So I didn't necessarily have an option to say no because it was just kind of talked about to the point that I would just give in because it was the easiest option.
I'm sorry, I would just be very remiss as someone who teaches about consent to fail to tell you that that is not consent. This is such a it's really not a gray area, but it's a hard area and it's challenging because so many people go through this, but that is not consent. And sex without consent, doing things sexually without consent is technically sexual assault. I mean, Chez, I don't know what you would say about that, but I mean, you cannot bribe someone, you cannot break someone's will down, you cannot berate them or threaten them or make them feel like you're going to break up with them in order to get the sexual things that you want, that you get to get anything that you want, you know? I mean, like, let's imagine this is money and he's doing the same thing to get money out of you. I mean, that would be extortion. It's not right. And I'm this close to like not wanting to say that's sexual assault, but that is, you cannot wear someone down.
It is. It's manipulation, and it could be considered assault. Yeah, especially if you clearly said, "No, I do not want," even if it wasn't clear the words "no," but it was, "I'm not comfortable with this."
The definition of consent is yes means yes. That's and I was explaining this yesterday. Enthusiastic consent is real. I mean, yes means yes is the low bar, which is different than no means no. This means I'm not saying like I didn't not say no. This means I said yes. That's the very legal lowest bar, and that's without coercion. But we want to get you even higher where it's like, hell yeah, I'd like to try that with you. That's really what the goal, the aspirational goal is in your sexual encounters. And I think it's really important for you to hear that because too many people today are made to feel as though I don't even want to call it vanilla, but I'm sure you're very familiar with the term vanilla. That, mainstream missionary sex, or some people don't like oral sex, and that's okay. There are other partners out there who will meet your sexual needs. You don't have to be with somebody who is pushing for these things, right? Because you shouldn't be made to feel that you need to be slapped or choked or oral sex if you don't want it or anal sex if you don't want it. Like all of those things, you get to choose. Yes, I genuinely, authentically want this. I desire it. That is really the goal. And if you're not feeling that way in your relationship, then there's a problem. And also, if you can't talk about it, if you can't say to your partner, hey, listen, I'm not really into this, but why don't we explore some other things that we could do that maybe both of us feel comfortable with?
I definitely didn't have a clear cut consent. It was more like you guys were saying, like coercion into believing that I would like it as soon as I had that false belief in my head created by him. it was to the point where he felt like we could try it. And then if we didn't like it, we wouldn't do it. But how would you know if you didn't try it, kind of thing?
You have this perspective that of the picture, like you get the picture. You were coerced and how it kind of slowly happened. My wondering is this, was he that way in the whole relationship? Was there kind of these coercive moments or manipulation or kind of pushing you in certain directions in the rest of your relationship too?
Yeah, and I wouldn't not necessarily like in severe ways, but almost like things as stupid as like I would like want to go out and like sit on the beach with his family versus like sit inside and watch the Celtics game. And he would say like, "Well, we can watch the Celtics game this time and like I'll make popcorn and get waters and stuff. And then how about next time we go outside?" And so it was kind of always like, and like I understand like a relationship is a compromise and you sometimes have to do things that you don't necessarily love to do if they're not harmful. Like watching the Celtics versus sitting on the beach is a very harmless choice to make, but it was more just like catering towards like what he would want to do versus what I would want to do throughout like the whole relationship in that sense.
Right, which is not a healthy relationship, and that's what I wondered. So, for the future of your relationships, you'll start now your radar is there. So, you'll start to really notice those things when somebody is less giving in that way and less receptive to your needs and your, desires and your part in the discussions. So, you'll notice that now, I'm sure, earlier. So, for that, it's good because you've got this perspective as a young person to say, "Okay, that doesn't work for me. I already know that. I've already been down that road. That doesn't work for me."
Yeah, I definitely do have a bigger knowledge bank when it comes to finding future partners. And even I haven't really like even tried to find a new partner, but just in like talking to a few guys back and forth, a lot of them are very sexually driven. And I feel very, very turned off by that. And I have kind of dropped a bunch of them because that seems to be the only focus. And so that's definitely something that I've learned to avoid, or not necessarily avoid, but be wary of.
Dr. Chez, I'd like to maybe even just say this. I hear this a lot of times. Guys are just so sexually driven. And certainly there have been studies. And yes, in some studies, they say men are, a little bit more sexually driven than women. But I mean, women are pretty sexually driven. This is just my theory. But pornography, the definition of pornography is that it is created to arouse. Erotica, pornography, smut, all of that is created to arouse the viewer, the listener, the watcher, the reader. That is the goal. So if we're watching porn or reading smut or doing all of this, our sex drive is going to be super high. And the difference between guys and girls is that it is so normalized in our culture that guys watch porn. It's like nobody even questions men watching porn. Boys will be boys. And that has an underlying message of boys are horny. Boys will do this to girls. Boys are always sexually driven. And I just can't help but think that in this hyper sexualized, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I mean it in that when you have all of this availability of pornography, like back in when I was young, you didn't have access to all of this. But now that you have access to it all the time, of course, what teenage hormone driven kid is not going to watch porn as often as they can get their hands on it, which is why I hold very little blame to guys. I mean, I feel like it's a lack of education, really, because they're not even aware. Their hormones are driving their behavior, and then their behavior is creating this hypersexualized outlook on everything. And I've talked to enough porn habituated, addicted, whatever you want to call them, people to know that when you watch porn so frequently, everything that you look at becomes a scenario in porn. Like they all say it. They're like, I could be at the Circle K and someone reaches down to pick up gum on the lower shelf, and that triggers me back to a porn that I watched. So this like heightened sex drive I think is largely in part to how available and how frequently people are watching porn. And they're not even realizing that this is not the way to approach girls. I think it is a real turnoff because, the studies show porn is watched or habituated 70% by men, 30% of the habituation is women, but it's a much lower number. So I think a lot of girls are like, whoa, dude, what? Or where are you coming from with all this, hypersexual talk and aggressive language? And, maybe that's what you've experienced. I don't know. I'm assuming from what I've heard.
Yes, definitely a very prominent feature in my age group, just in the few that I've talked to, and there have not been that many because it hasn't been my focus the past few months, but just amongst the two or three, it's really the only topic of conversation that has come up, and they don't have anything else to talk about.
It's interesting because you're trying to build a relationship, right? Intimacy is
Yes.
so many different layers. Intimacy is conversation. Intimacy is experiences with somebody. Intimacy is common desires, common interests, right? If we're so focused on this one aspect, it's like that's why you're feeling, I don't even know. I mean, I'm throwing this out there because I don't necessarily even believe that you're not as sexual as you think that you are not. I think that people are throwing you a whole lot of sexual stuff and you're like, I'm looking for true connection and intimacy and this isn't it. And by default, you're almost turned off by what it is that they're offering to you because it's like so lame in comparison to what it is that you need, which is connection.
Yes, definitely. And I've talked about that with one of my closer friends at school too. And it's not the fact that we're not interested, but it's you're right, it's the like connection and true like relationship between the other person that we're looking for. And the kids our age aren't either mature enough or understand that it's not necessarily a smart way to attack it with conversations around this rather than trying to actually build like a friendship first.
The scales are just really tipped in one direction. So if you're over here, you're trying to help get it a little more balanced, but that's really tough. So I'm glad you have friends that you can talk to about this because the more that the women, and I don't just want to say this only happens to women, but the more that your friends that you can be open about these kind of things and kind of share, hey, how do we really feel? And there is no normal, but there's a range of what feels acceptable to you guys. And so the more you can talk about these kind of things and how to balance this out better and understand what you're looking for, the more that word hopefully gets out there to males and others that are tipping the scale the other way. But it's really hard, I imagine. What year are you in college?
I'm going to be a junior.
You're going to be a junior. Yeah. What are your career aspirations? Do you have ideas of what you want to do?
I want to be a pharmacist, so I'm currently working as a pharmacy tech and I'm studying for my national exam, which I'll take in a few weeks. So I'm definitely advancing further in my career aspirations than I was last summer when I was in the relationship. So that's been a positive of moving on, is kind of more focus on myself and my career, which is definitely a positive, but amongst all the other sadness.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's grief, and this has been a long term relationship. So that is, almost like a divorce in a way that, I mean, that was a very long term at your age. It was all those formative years of high school. So,
Yes.
so there will be grief for sure. And I'm sure there were good parts of the relationship too that you miss. And those are the takeaways. And then there are these learning experience that I can bring into every part of my relationships moving forward and know this is what I don't want or this is what I, do want. But I love that you've got your career path because when Steph was talking about our drives, our purpose is a big part of our drive. And at certain ages, especially hormonal and all these other things come into play, and people don't know what their purpose is. So it's a way to escape the reality of not knowing, what am I doing? What am I here for? Who am I? How do I feel? Is through pornography and other addictions and other things. So the fact that you've got this path and this purpose is really, really healthy and exciting. And I have no doubt you'll make an excellent pharmacist. So, yay, yay, you. We need you.
Thank you.
I want to ask you a question. It might be personal and you certainly don't have to answer it. This is the other thing that someone just brought up to me was the sexual experiences that they had were super long. And I actually feel like that's a really important topic of discussion, especially with somebody who watches porn, as a partner who watches porn, because as I explained, as you escalate, that's really all that turns you on. So basically, you end up having a hard time finishing. And that is oftentimes uncomfortable for the partner who's an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours into sex and it doesn't feel good anymore.
As it went on, it was more time in the beginning of the experiences taking to like lead into it. I'd be laying there and just say, like, vividly remember saying, like, come on already, like, finish, like, do it. Cause I was just kind of laying there, like, uncomfortable. And I have been self conscious my whole life. And I didn't necessarily like the idea of laying there exposed.
I'm going to send you, because it comes up in a lot of ways, but just Dr. Chez and I think it's important to understand the types of sexual activity that there are out there and kind of make a judgment and assessment for ourselves how we feel about these different things. And just you saying that you didn't like just being exposed naked for so long made you feel uncomfortable. That's actually one of the things on there. How do I feel about my partner seeing me with all the lights on? Do I prefer having the lights off? It goes from things that seem simple like that to things that are like, how do I feel about anal sex? How do I feel about being choked? How do I feel about, various different sexual activities? How do I feel about a threesome? All of these things are important, especially when obviously he exposed you to porn, but there's probably a lot of things that you didn't even see that he watched, I imagine, because just the nature of how porn addiction goes, they can have, just so you know, they can have 12 screens open at one time. And that's part of the addiction, is just they need all of these screens. And I like to tell people, because I think feeling inadequate, it gets covered up by trying to be that girl. But I like to tell people you can never be that girl, because that girl isn't that girl. That girl is 12 vulvas on a screen. There's no way you can be 12 vulvas on a screen. There's no way you can be all of those things. This has nothing to do with you. This has everything to do with the addiction, habituation, whatever you want to call it, that they experience. So this can make you feel really insecure and like you're not enough, but no one would be enough. Not even that porn star, not even that favorite porn star would be enough. I promise you that. And I have girls that compromise themselves in a lot of ways. Like I had a girl who told me, I never wanted to make a video of myself because I know the negative consequences, but I love my boyfriend. He really wanted me to. And we were away from each other for a long time. And while we were separated, I wanted to give him a video of myself so that he could watch that instead of porn. And I was like, girl, that one video of you is never, ever going to be able to match 12 open screens on their monitor. You could never be that. So when you compromise yourself, you have to remember that it hurts you and it's not really ever going to satisfy them.
Do you think he has any realization that he might have a problem with this, especially when he started signing things or, writing porn star names in letters to you? Do you think he had any awakening, or did you ever say to him, hey, this is like really not okay and something that might be a problem for him?
Yeah, I definitely don't think he has any idea. And every time I tried to say, like, this is weird, like, this is not normal, not something you should be fascinated with enough to write or like sign your cards as her name, he was always like, "Oh, it's just a joke, like, don't read into it, like, it doesn't mean that much, like, it's just a joke." So I don't think he does have a realization, or he does know and he's trying to cover it by saying it's just a joke, so I don't know, it could go either way.
Yeah, so the level of his disconnection to you and the level of manipulation and kind of invalidating your feelings every step of the way is I'm really glad you're not dating him anymore. And I'm not saying, like I, I I do think there could be some things characterized as assault, but I'm not saying he's evil or whatever. How do I know? But it feels like he's in the dark with knowing that he needs some help with this.
He needs consent education as well. I wanted to say, you had said that, he would coerce you into doing something and say, all right, well, like, how are you going to know unless you try it? So this is another question I have for you. If you tried it and you didn't like it and you said that to him, was he okay with never doing it again?
Usually that specific act, yes, but he would find something to try to replace it, and so it was kind of always like, if I said no to one thing after we did it, it was like, "Okay, well, then why don't we try this one instead?"
How far did it progress?
I was never being hurt. It was more just, like, very weird kinks, like, to the point where he would want me to, like, pee on him, which is just very not sanitary in my mind, and that was, like, the final straw, and I was like, "No, we need to take a break from this because this is not normal."
So that's straight out of porn that Steph can talk about. And that's actually on the checklist that we're talking about. So awareness brings awareness within yourself to say, "Oh, wow, that's a thing. Okay, how would I feel about that? No, that's not sanitary. I'm not into that." So knowing that ahead of time as the things that are out there in porn is really helpful.
Honestly, my hope is that for any young man out there, there's a lot of young guys who think, oh, I'm just going to watch porn until I get a girlfriend. They think it's like this stopover until they get what they think will be this endless supply of sex, however they want it. What they don't realize is that they are creating this escalation, and then it really takes rewiring their brains for anyone who's addicted to porn, it really takes rewiring because it becomes part of everything. Like I said, you could be in the Circle K and someone's picking up gum, and all of a sudden your brain is triggered and you need to do exactly what that scenario was that you were watching in porn. So it's really takes a long time. I mean, even to stop watching porn, people can go through anywhere from a month to a year of what they call flatlining, where nothing arouses them. Like they're like, my penis, my vulva, my genitalia will never work again because I can't get aroused to anything. And that's actually not really the truth. Like it will always be a struggle, like anything, but you can rewire your tastes. Unfortunately, and I hate to say that because people go like, oh, I'll just keep doing it and then I can just, detox and rewire. It's really not that easy. And the best thing you can do is to realize warning signs when you start to ask people to do things that they don't feel comfortable with, when you can't get out of the house because you have to masturbate first, when you are looking through, and I've heard all of these scenarios, when you keep looking through Pornhub to find the exact specific type of thing that you need in order to get aroused. These should be little red flags that go, ooh, there's a problem here. And especially if you're expecting things and manipulating your partner to do things that they don't feel comfortable with, that's not healthy. I'm not saying, even urinating on someone. There are two partners out there who really like that. I am all for whatever it is you like. If it gets you off and it makes you happy, have at it. But that is not everybody's taste. I think if you are trying to convince someone, you got to like check yourself. There's something going on there that needs you to really check in and go, there's a problem here.
And we live in a society where, like you were saying, fast access to everything really does mess with our minds. I mean, that is creating these issues and these problems. So I don't know what the solution is there, but as young as, you guys were 14. So as young as 14, this programming doesn't happen overnight, happens over time. And this programming and the neurological pathways to the dopamine, hits that he was getting, those aren't easy to fix overnight. That's not going to happen overnight. And so until it becomes a problem, this could go on for a long, long, long time. And it does.
You know why? It goes on in hiding.
Hiding.
Nobody knows except your partner that you're addicted to porn.
Right.
Nobody knows. It's not
Right.
like you're an alcoholic and falling down.
Right.
It's not like you're a drug addict and all doped out. Like, you're addicted to something that you can quick masturbate to in the bathroom and nobody knows.
Right.
And it's shame. We, like, our culture, we surround sex with shame. If we could just remove shame, there is no shame. I'm going to say that right now. There is no shame for anybody who's even addicted to porn. You were actually failed by a system that didn't educate you properly. You were taught about the addictive nature of drugs and alcohol. You should have also been told about the addictive nature of our strongest drive in our body, food, sex, air, like these things we need. There's no shame in it, but certainly that's a lot of times what drives the hidden nature of this addiction and lets it go on for years unnoticed.
Yeah, your bravery, Nicole, I think will help other women who are in this situation, maybe girls too, that are as young as you were, to understand, because you were kind of questioning, like, I don't know if this is normal or if this is okay or if this is something I want or don't want. I mean, you pretty much knew it wasn't what you were wanting, but you didn't want to lose him, it sounded like. So this will help other people, because that's the problem, is we don't talk about these things because we don't know that it's not the norm. We're thinking, "Oh, okay." And for young men and boys watching porn and becoming addicted to it, that's their education. So they think, "Oh, this is okay. This is the norm, or this is what I need now," because then it becomes the need takes over. This is what I need to have.
But I mean, also, if you think about it, Nicole, like, he's been watching since he was 10 years old. Let's say he's been watching girls act like they like being hit, being peed on. I mean, a porn star wouldn't be a porn star for very long if she didn't act like she loved everything that was being done to her. It's not realistic in any way. But unfortunately, like, my daughter had this experience where boys would say these horribly misogynistic, like, rapey comments to her. She was like 14 years old. She would come home because of what I do. She knew, Mom, this isn't right. This is what they're saying. And this was the scary part. She knew it was wrong and she would call them out on it and be like, you're disgusting. That's misogynistic. That's rapey. And the other little girls in the class, and we're talking like seventh, eighth grade, 12, 13, 14, they were like shutting her down, acting like she was making a big deal out of things that weren't a big deal because they wanted the boys' attention and they didn't understand. So for them, that behavior becomes normalized too. Being called a slut, being told, oh, I can't wait to like slam you or bang you, or you banged everyone in the class. Like, they don't even know that that's not, they think that's cool. Oh, I'm the girl who is so sexy that guys think I'm banging every guy in the class. Like, they don't have any contextualization to say this is not what healthy looks like. Back in the day when Dr. Chez and I were young, a boy told you he liked you by making you a mixed tape and giving it to you. Like, legit, he'd send a letter over to you that actually said nice things. You're really pretty. Do you want to go out on a date? He didn't come up behind you and go like, I'd love to, bang you. Like, that just didn't happen. So
Right.
the child has no context.
Right.
So just think about that. Maybe it just gives you a bit of compassion to understand that as much as it wasn't your fault what happened to you, in some ways, though we have to be personally responsible, it was the lack of education that your boyfriend was given that led him to be who he is.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing. And my hope for you, Nicole, is that you continue this path of, you're studying about the effects of medications and healing. And I hope that your own healing comes home with this, that, you had to kind of sacrifice yourself. And that's why it doesn't surprise me that you then said you struggle with an eating disorder, because that might be part of your patterning, that self-sacrificing is something that you feel more at ease with than standing in your own strength and your own voice and your own feelings. So my hope for you is that you continue to just kind of stand strong in your gut. You've got a good gut, like you knew, and you stand strong in your gut and voice your opinions, stay where you are. There are good guys out there. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I don't like the word good, but there are guys out there that
Conscious.
will be conscious and meet you where you are. So I just say that because I'm optimistic, of course, that the world has great people. Anyway, I encourage you to stay your path with the healing and not feel that you have to self-sacrifice ever for another person, because you don't. You matter, you're worthy, you're an amazing young human. So I wish you continued success.
Thank you.
And I'm going to thank you for all the people that are going to listen to this, that you had the courage to say you wanted me to do X, Y, and Z, because so many people, it's hard to actually get the words out. And I know that was hard for you. I could tell because it didn't come till the end of our conversation that there are things that are hard to say because you feel some amount of shame around them or whatever. But I just want to say, like, that courage is what is going to give other people courage to do and to say and to advocate for themselves.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I want to also recommend that you watch a documentary. It's called Raised on Porn, and it's by
Okay.
Exodus Cry. And I think that I think that that will lead to healing in a way for you, because it will help you to understand what happened to you. It will also help you to understand the brain of somebody who's gotten addicted to porn. I found that just for a lot of my students, they walked away from watching that saying, I was angry at my ex-boyfriend or whatever, but it helps you to come to a place of compassion. And honestly, I think that if you're in a place of compassion, it's going to help you to choose your next partner, because you're not going to be judging and pushing that energy away. You're going to be open and realizing that people have this and that's not for you. That's not who you're meant to be with. You're meant to be with somebody who's more awake and aware. But I just think that energy, a place of like compassion, is a better place to come from, because sometimes what we resist persists. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to get to. So
Sure.
definitely watch Raised on Porn.
Okay. I will. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Nicole.
you, Nicole. Have a great day, and thank you for talking to us so early.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Chez Leeby and Stephanie Boye based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guest that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7onsundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.